Welcome back to Void of Fears. Before we jump into today's story, I've got to ask for a quick favour. If you could smash that like button, drop a comment below, and hit subscribe if you haven't already. It seriously makes a huge difference. YouTube's algorithm loves that stuff, and it pushes my videos to new viewers who might dig these stories too. I really appreciate every single one of you who takes the time to do that. It means the world to me and helps keep this channel growing. Alright, enough of me rambling. Let's dive into today's story. The coffee had gone cold 3 hours ago, but Dr. Thomas Whitmore hadn't noticed. At 42 years old, he'd spent enough nights at the Deep Space Observation Center in New Mexico to know that most shifts were unremarkable. The James Webb Space Telescope fed him endless streams of stellar data, cosmic background radiation, the usual symphony of light from distant stars. He'd learned to find peace in the routine, in the soft glow of his monitors, and the gentle hum of the facility's climate control system. It was Wednesday, October 16th, 2024. The time read 11:47 in the evening. Thomas had his classical music playing low, Debussy's Clair de Lune, when something caught his eye. A spectral analysis from a star system designated K2877, approximately 640 million light-years away in the Sculptor Galaxy region. The light signature was behaving strangely, modulating in a way that natural stellar phenomena simply didn't. He sat forward, set down his mug, and pulled up the full readout. The modulation was deliberate, repeating every 19.7 hours, the exact same fluctuation in the light spectrum. Thomas felt his heart rate quicken. In 20 years of astronomical observation, he'd never seen anything like this. He reached for his phone and called Dr. Elena Vasquez, his colleague, and one of the few people he trusted with something this significant. "Elena, I need you to come in, now." "Thomas, it's almost midnight. What?" "I think I found something artificial." Silence on the other end. Then, "I'll be there in 40 minutes. She made it in 35. Elena Vasquez was a brilliant astrophysicist, 10 years younger than Thomas, with a sharp mind and a healthy skepticism that had saved them from false positives more than once. She stood beside him now, staring at the same readout he'd been analyzing, her dark eyes moving rapidly across the screen. "Run the diagnostics again," she said quietly. He did. Same results. "It's artificial," she whispered. "My God, Thomas, it's actually artificial." They spent the next 72 hours barely sleeping, barely eating, running every test they could think of. The signal wasn't just a simple pulse. It contained layers of information, dense and complex, woven into the light itself, visual components, audio components, and something else, something they couldn't yet identify, but could measure its presence like a shadow cast by invisible light. By Saturday morning, they decoded the first visual portion. The image that materialized on Thomas's screen made him forget to breathe. It was a city, but not like any city humanity had ever conceived. Towers stretched upward for what must have been miles, their surfaces smooth as glass, but reflecting no light. They were wider at their peaks than at their bases, connected by bridges that curved in ways that seemed to ignore the basic laws of physics. The architecture followed principles of engineering that existed outside human understanding, as if the builders had known secrets about space and structure that made gravity irrelevant. And moving through those streets, barely visible in the grainy, ancient transmission, were beings. They walked on two legs like humans, but that's where the similarity ended. Their limbs were elongated, joints appearing where joints shouldn't exist, allowing movement that was simultaneously graceful and disturbing. Their bodies were tall and angular, and their faces, Thomas realized with a cold sensation in his stomach, had features he couldn't quite focus on. Not because the image was unclear, but because his brain seemed unable to process what it was seeing. Eyes in configurations that defied bilateral symmetry. structures that might have been mouths or sensory organs, arranged in patterns that made his vision blur when he tried to examine them directly. "When was this light emitted?" Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Thomas checked the calculations twice. 640 million years ago. When this light left their world, Earth only had primitive multicellular life. Just slime and ocean. Eleanor pulled up a chair, sat down heavily. They were building empires when our world was still learning what it meant to be alive. Word spread quickly within the astronomical community, at least the classified portions of it. Within a week, the project had expanded. 5 more scientists joined them, each signing non-disclosure agreements that could land them in federal prison if violated. The project received a code name, Ancient Echo. Dr. Vincent Hayes arrived as their psychological consultant. At 56, he'd worked with deep space observation teams for years, helping researchers cope with the existential weight of their discoveries. He seemed unfazed by the initial findings, taking notes in a leather-bound journal and asking pointed questions about the team's sleep schedules and stress levels. Eleanor took the lead on linguistic analysis. The signal contained what appeared to be a primer, basic concepts that built upon themselves, teaching the receiver how to understand more complex information. It started with simple counting, moved to basic chemistry, then to astronomical concepts the receiver would recognize. From there, it blossomed into something far more sophisticated. "It's brilliant," Elena said during one of their team meetings. "Whoever designed this assumed nothing about who would receive it. They started from absolute zero and built a bridge of understanding." After 2 weeks, they broke through to the actual content. The civilization called themselves the Eternal Architects. Their history unfolded before the team like a book written in light, 800 million years old by the time it reached Earth's timeline. They'd achieved interstellar travel when Earth was still a ball of molten rock. They'd spread across 200 worlds, built a population of 90 billion souls. They'd mapped 40,000 star systems, created artificial worlds, moved planets through space like chess pieces, harnessed the energy of stars themselves. Their greatest achievement was something they called the threshold, a megastructure that created doorways between distant points in space. The decoded images showed it a ring of impossible scale, orbiting a star, its surface covered in structures that hurt in to contemplate. Through it, the architects could step from one side of their empire to the other in moments. Thomas spent 16-hour days in the lab, surviving on coffee and determination. His wife Jennifer called regularly, her concern growing with each conversation. "Tommy, you need to come home. You need to sleep. In a real bed." "I can't, Jen. Not yet. You don't understand what we're looking at here." "Then help me understand. Come home for dinner. Tell me about it." But he couldn't. The non-disclosure agreement was ironclad, and even if it wasn't, how could he explain that they were reading the diary of gods who had died before Earth's first vertebrate had crawled onto land? The breakthrough that changed everything came on a Friday at 2:34 in the morning. Thomas had been working alone, the rest of the team having finally succumbed to exhaustion. He decoded a series of personal logs from what appeared to be a high-ranking architect, a being whose name translated roughly to Keeper of Distant Gates. The early logs were optimistic, almost joyful. The Keeper described a momentous discovery made 643 million years ago, their time. An exploration team had found ruins on a dead world, orbiting a black hole. Not recent ruins, not even ancient by the architect's standards. These structures predated the architects by billions of years. Thomas leaned closer to his screen as he read. The ruins were unlike anything in the architect's extensive database of civilizations. The beings who built them had understood the universe in ways that made even the architect's achievements look primitive. Their structures existed in a state that seemed to violate causality itself, present in multiple timeframes simultaneously. Their technology operated on principles the architects couldn't begin to fathom. They brought artifacts back. Small objects, careful samples, things they hoped to study and understand. The artifacts were beautiful, the keeper wrote. They sang in frequencies that touched something deep in the architect's psyche, promising understanding, offering knowledge, whispering secrets about the fundamental nature of existence. Then, the tone of the logs changed. 3 months after the artifacts arrived at the primary research facility, people began reporting strange experiences, dreams of vast, empty spaces that felt more real than waking life. A sense of being watched by something that existed in dimensions they couldn't perceive. Scientists who'd worked directly with the artifacts started speaking in languages no one recognized, drawing symbols that seemed to move when no one was looking directly at them. The keeper's handwriting, or whatever passed for handwriting, in the architect's written language, became increasingly erratic. Reports flooded in from across the empire. Entire research facilities went silent. Cities that had thrived for millennia stopped responding to communication. Survey ships sent to investigate found worlds still functioning, still populated, but fundamentally changed. The inhabitants moved in strange synchronization. They built new structures according to no recognizable plan. They sang in harmonies that drove listeners mad. Thomas felt a chill run down his spine as he decoded the next image, one of the architect worlds photographed from orbit. The entire night side of the planet was visible, and it should have been blazing with city lights, a jewel of civilization visible from space. Instead, it was almost entirely dark. But there were lights, thousands upon thousands of them, moving across the surface in perfect synchronization, tracing spiral patterns that seemed to draw the eye inward, deeper and deeper, until Thomas had to physically look away from the screen. The keeper's final entries were brief and desperate. We thought we were ready. We thought our knowledge, our science, our 800 million years of civilization made us safe. We were wrong. The artifacts were not treasures to be studied. They were bait. They were hooks. And we bit down willingly, eagerly, thinking we were the fishermen, when all along we were the catch. Do not follow our path. Do not look for what came before. Some doors should never be opened. There are older things in the universe than starlight. They were old when the first galaxies formed. They do not think as we think. They do not want as we want. They simply are, and their existence is incompatible with ours. We reached for their knowledge, and it reached back. Now we are changing. Now we are becoming something else. Something that serves purposes we can't comprehend. If you receive this, know that we chose to send it in our final days. Not as a greeting, as a warning. Turn back. Forget you ever heard us. Forget the deeper dark. Let the old things sleep. Let the ancient places remain undisturbed. We thought we could dance with the abyss and remain unchanged. We were wrong. Thomas sat in the empty lab, the only sound his own breathing and the soft whir of computers. He read the message 5 more times, hoping each time that he'd somehow misunderstood. But the translation was clear, the meaning unambiguous. This wasn't first contact. This was a death letter sent across 640 million years of space. When Elena arrived Monday morning, she found Thomas still at his desk, eyes bloodshot, hands trembling slightly as he showed her what he'd found. She read in silence, her face growing paler with each line. "What destroyed them?" she asked when she finished. "I don't think destroyed is the right word," Thomas said quietly. "The keeper said they were changing, becoming something else, something that served purposes they couldn't understand." "The artifacts," Elena whispered. It was the artifacts. The artifacts were from something older, something that exists in a way we don't have words for. The architects touched that knowledge and it infected them, changed them, turned them into something that wasn't the architects anymore. Dr. Vincent Hayes joined them an hour later. He read the decoded messages twice, his usual professional composure cracking. "We need to limit exposure to this material," he said finally. "I'm seeing concerning signs across the team. Dr. Patterson requested medical leave this morning. Said he's been having intrusive thoughts, nightmares where he's falling through spaces that don't exist in 3 dimensions. Dr. Joe reported similar symptoms. Said she keeps seeing symbols in her peripheral vision, and when she turns to look at them directly, they're never there." Thomas rubbed his eyes. They felt gritty, painful. "We can't stop now. We need to finish decoding the message." "Why?" Vincent's voice was sharp, urgent. "They're gone, Thomas. Dead for longer than complex life has existed on Earth. What does it matter now what destroyed them?" "Because they sent this for a reason. They used their last days, maybe their last hours of sanity, to craft this transmission and shoot it out into the universe. The least we can do is listen to the whole thing." But over the next week, Thomas began to understand Vincent's concern. He wasn't sleeping well. When he did manage to drift off, he dreamed of falling through vast empty spaces, of being surrounded by a darkness that was somehow alive and aware, that watched him with attention that felt crushing in its intensity. He'd wake in his office not remembering having fallen asleep, his computer screen showing static or sometimes images he didn't remember pulling up. Images of spirals, images of structures that seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions, images that made his head ache and his stomach turn. Security footage from 3 in the morning showed him alone in the lab, staring at a blank monitor, his lips moving. The audio captured him whispering something over and over, but the words weren't in any language the security team recognized. Elena reported similar experiences. Dreams of drowning in stars, of seeing patterns in the cosmos that revealed terrible truths she couldn't remember upon waking. She started avoiding the main lab, working from her smaller office down the hall, limiting her direct exposure to the decoded signals. Her hands shook when she held her coffee cup. Her eyes had dark circles that makeup couldn't hide. But they continued. They had to. Wednesday evening, 9:15. The team gathered for what they hoped would be the final decoding session. The last segment of the transmission was dense, layered with information compressed to an almost impossible degree. It took hours to properly translate, and as the image resolved on the screen, Thomas felt the room temperature seemed to drop. It was a map, 847 points of light scattered across a section of the galaxy. Each point marked a world where the architects had established their civilization. Colonies, research stations, thriving planets with billions of inhabitants. Every single one was now silent, dead, dark for 640 million years. But there was more. Lines connecting the points, showing the progression. Whatever had destroyed the architects, or changed them, or infected them, hadn't struck randomly. It had moved systematically, world to world, following a specific trajectory through space. And the progression wasn't random, it was deliberate, purposeful, like something was following a path, travelling from star to star with terrible patience. Elena's hands flew across her keyboard, running calculations accounting for 640 million years of galactic rotation, stellar drift, the movement of spiral arms through space, the dance of stars around the galactic core. Her face went white. "Thomas," she said, her voice barely audible, "the trajectory. If you follow the pattern forward, accounting for all the movement, the time elapsed." She turned her screen toward him. The pattern pointed toward their region of space. The entity, the force, the infection, whatever it was, that had consumed the architects and turned their empire into a synchronized nightmare, had been travelling for 640 million years. And according to the calculations, accounting for the speed suggested by the timeline of the architect's fall, it was somewhere between 50 and 100 light years from Earth, right now, at this very moment. The room was silent except for the hum of electronics. "Maybe the calculation is wrong," Dr. Patterson said, his voice cracking. "Maybe we're misunderstanding the progression. Maybe it didn't continue travelling after the architects fell. But they all knew that was hope speaking, not reason. The emergency meeting happened 3 days later in a secure facility in Virginia. Government officials, military advisors, representatives from NASA, and the Department of Defense. They sat around a long table, reviewing everything Ancient Echo had discovered, their faces grave in the fluorescent light. The debate was heated. Thomas argued for disclosure. The public has a right to know. If there's something out there, if we're potentially in danger, people deserve to know the truth. They deserve time to prepare. A general whose nameplate read Hutchinson shook his head. And tell them what, Doctor? That an alien civilization died 600 million years ago, and something might be heading our way? You'd cause global panic, economic collapse, mass hysteria. And for what? A threat you can't even properly identify or prove is coming here. Maybe the architects sent this as their final act, Elena said quietly. Maybe we're supposed to run, evacuate the planet if we can, spread humanity out across other star systems so we're not all in one place when it arrives. Run where? Thomas turned to her. You've seen the map. The architects were spread across 200 worlds. They had interstellar travel, technology we can barely dream of, and it found them all. There's nowhere in the galaxy that's safe if this thing is what we think it is. Dr. Vincent Hayes spoke up from the back of the room. There's another possibility we need to consider. The psychological effects we've been experiencing, the team's deteriorating mental state. What if the transmission itself is dangerous? What if exposure to their knowledge, their history, the very act of understanding what happened to them, is the actual threat? You're saying the message is infected? Elena asked. I'm saying we don't understand what we're dealing with. The architects found ruins from something incomprehensibly ancient. They studied those ruins and their civilization collapsed. We've been studying the architect's message and we're showing signs of mental deterioration. Dr. Patterson is having dissociative episodes. Dr. Joe hasn't spoken a coherent sentence in 3 days. Thomas was found at 4 a.m. drawing symbols on his office wall, with a marker he doesn't remember picking up. Maybe there are some things we're not meant to understand. Maybe comprehension itself is the contagion. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. Thomas thought about the symbols he'd drawn, the ones he'd washed off the wall before anyone else arrived, the ones that had looked almost alive in the dim light of his office. He thought about the dreams, about the sensation of something vast and ancient, turning its attention toward him like a searchlight sweeping across the darkness. So what do you propose? He asked quietly. Vincent met his eyes. We stop. We seal everything we've found. We limit who has access to the information. We observe, but we don't study. We record, but we don't try to understand. You're talking about willful ignorance. I'm talking about survival. The decision came down from levels above Thomas's clearance, from offices he'd never see, and people whose names he'd never know. Ancient Echo was to be classified at the highest level. All findings sealed in vaults that required 3 separate authorizations to open. The team disbanded, effective immediately. They were to sign additional agreements, undergo psychological evaluation, and never speak of the project again, under penalty of treason. Thomas returned to New Mexico to collect his personal belongings. The lab had already been stripped, all the equipment removed, all the drives wiped or destroyed. It was like Ancient Echo had never existed. But Thomas knew better. He'd made copies. Not of everything. Not of the dangerous segments that might carry whatever infection Vincent feared, but of the images, the history, the final plea from the Keeper. He printed them on paper, old-fashioned physical documents that couldn't be remotely deleted. He'd hidden them in places the government wouldn't think to look. If humanity was going to ignore this, someone needed to remember it had been given. 6 months passed like a fever dream. Thomas sat in his home office in April 2025, preparing for an interview he'd agreed to give on the condition of absolute anonymity. His face would be obscured, his voice digitally altered, his location kept secret. The journalist, a woman named Rebecca Cross, who specialized in fringe science and government cover-ups, had found him through back channels he still didn't fully understand. But he needed to tell this story. He needed someone besides the government to know what they'd found out there in the dark. He'd left the Deep Space Observation Center, couldn't continue after what they'd learned. Every time he looked at the stars now, he felt like he was staring into a vast cemetery, full of civilizations that had risen and fallen, and left nothing but messages carved in light. Elena had moved back to Argentina, to a small town in Patagonia, where the night sky was clear and she could see the Milky Way in all its glory. He'd tried calling her once, but she'd hung up as soon as she recognized his voice. He tried again a week later and got a disconnected number message. 2 of their team members had been institutionalized. Dr. Patterson claimed he could see spaces that didn't exist, gaps in reality that opened when he wasn't watching, doorways to places that had no business existing in a sane universe. He tried to walk through one during a supervised therapy session and had to be physically restrained. Dr. Joe had stopped speaking entirely, would only draw the same spiraling symbol over and over on any surface she could reach, sometimes for hours at a time, her hand moving with mechanical precision. Dr. Vincent Hayes, he'd committed suicide in January. He'd driven out to a remote section of the New Mexico desert, taken enough pills to fell a horse, and lay down on the hood of his car to watch the stars. His note was brief, written in a shaky hand. I've been seeing the spaces between. They're not empty. They've never been empty. There are things living in the gaps, in the places where reality gets thin. I can't unsee it now. I can't unknow it. The architects were right. Some knowledge destroys the knower. I'd rather die as a human than live as whatever I'm becoming. Thomas showed Rebecca the printed images from the transmission, the only physical evidence he'd managed to keep. The towering cities of the architects, their impossible geometry, now seeming almost beautiful in its alienness. The dead world with its synchronized lights tracing patterns that still made his eyes water. The map showing the trajectory of something older and darker than anyone wanted to contemplate. They want us to forget, he said to the camera he couldn't see, to the audience that would never know his face. The government, the military, everyone with clearance to know what we found. They want it buried. Maybe that's the right choice. Maybe knowledge itself is the contagion the architects warned about. Maybe some truths are too dangerous to know, too corrosive to comprehend. But then he leaned forward, his obscured face closer to the microphone. 3 weeks ago, I got a message from a contact I still have at the observatory. They told me the James Webb detected another signal. Different location, different star system, 920 million light years away. Different civilization, different language, different history, but the same desperate plea at the end, the same map, the same trajectory. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. It's found others before us. Hundreds of civilizations, maybe thousands, spread across billions of years. We're not the first to receive these transmissions. The architects weren't the first to look too deep and see too much. There's a pattern to it, a cycle that repeats across cosmic time. Civilizations rise, they advance. They reach a certain threshold of knowledge and technology. They start asking questions about the fundamental nature of reality, and then something notices them, something that's been waiting in the spaces between stars since before the first galaxies formed, and every single civilization that caught its attention, that looked into the deeper dark and tried to understand what they saw there, ceased to exist, not destroyed, changed, transformed into something that serves purposes we can't begin to understand. So why are you telling me this? Rebecca asked, her voice steady, despite the content. If it's as dangerous as you say, if knowledge itself is the threat, why spread this information? Thomas was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer carefully. Because we're not going to heed this. I know humanity. I know how we work. We've never been good at learning from others' mistakes. We'll keep searching, keep probing deeper, keep asking questions that should never be asked. It's in our nature. We can't help ourselves. We see a mystery, and we have to solve it. We see a locked door, and we have to know what's behind it. The architects were like that. Every civilization that sent these messages was like that. They all thought they could dance with the abyss and remain unchanged. They were all wrong. He pulled out another document, one he'd been saving for the end of the interview. But here's the thing that keeps me up at night. That third signal, the one detected 3 weeks ago, I got more information about it yesterday. It was sent just 20 years ago. 20 years, not millions or billions. Which means that civilization was still thriving in 2005. They were out there presumably advanced, presumably wise enough to know about these transmissions because they sent one of their own. And they're already silent, already gone. 20 years from sending their message to complete collapse. Whatever's out there, whatever travels through the dark between stars, changing everything it touches, it's accelerating, moving faster, growing stronger. Or maybe it's just getting closer to us, and the civilizations it's been consuming are getting closer too. Rebecca was silent for a moment. Then, your contact. Did they say how far away this third signal originated? Thomas looked directly at where he imagined the camera lens was, though he couldn't see it through the obscuring screen. 40 light years. The civilization that sent it was only 40 light years from Earth. The interview ended shortly after. Rebecca promised to release it through channels that couldn't be traced, that couldn't be easily censored. Thomas didn't know if he believed her, but it didn't matter. He'd said what needed to be said. He sat in his office as the sun set outside his window, painting the New Mexico desert in shades of orange and red. The colors were beautiful, achingly so, and for a moment Thomas allowed himself to appreciate them without thinking about ancient civilizations or the things that consumed them. His computer chimed. Another encrypted message from his contact at the observatory. He should delete it. He should walk away. But he'd never been good at leaving mysteries unsolved. He opened it. The James Webb had been conducting a systematic survey of nearby star systems, looking for any additional signals. They'd found something at 32 light years. Not a transmission this time, just silence. A star system that should have been normal, unremarkable. But when they focused the telescope and really looked, they saw structures, megastructures orbiting the planets, still intact, still functional. But no signals, no transmissions, no signs of life. Just structures and lights moving across planet surfaces in synchronized patterns. And those patterns, his contact wrote, matched the ones in the architect's images, the spirals, the synchronized movements, the lights tracing designs that hurt to contemplate. It was already there, 32 light years away. Close enough that the light showing them this scene was only 32 years old. Close enough that whatever had consumed that civilization had done so during Thomas's own lifetime, while he was a child playing in his backyard, ignorant of the cosmic horror unfolding within sight of Earth. Thomas deleted the message, cleared his cache, stood up from his desk and walked to the window. The stars were beginning to emerge in the darkening sky, countless points of light in the vast expanse. Beautiful, ancient, silent. How many of them marked graves? How many carried messages no one would ever hear? How many were already infected with something older than starlight? He thought of the architects in their final days, choosing to send their message rather than flee, knowing it was too late for them but hoping someone else might learn from their mistake. He thought of all the civilizations that had come before, each one thinking they were ready to understand the deeper mysteries of existence, each one learning too late that some doors should never be opened. The K2877 signal continued to transmit. It would keep transmitting for billions of years. that desperate plea travelling through space long after Earth itself had turned to dust. And now there were others, more transmissions, more graves, more civilizations that had looked too deep and paid the price. And somewhere, maybe 50 light years away, maybe 32, maybe already here, something older than humanity could comprehend was making its patient way through the cosmos, changing everything it touched, leaving nothing but synchronized lights and empty structures in its wake. Thomas went downstairs to where Jennifer was making dinner. He kissed her cheek, smiled when she asked about his day, and said nothing about what he'd learned, or what might be coming, or the patient movement of things that lived in the spaces between stars. She told him about her day, about the new project at her architectural firm, about their daughter Emma's upcoming piano recital. Normal things, human things. He listened and responded, and tried to be present in this moment, in this life, while he still could. After dinner, after Jennifer had gone to bed, Thomas returned to his office. He pulled out the printed images one more time, studying them in the dim light. The architects' faces, their features that his brain still couldn't quite process. The synchronized lights on their dead world. The map showing the progression of something that consumed civilizations like a slow-moving tide. He thought about Dr. Vincent Hayes' note, about seeing the spaces between, about becoming something other than human. He thought about the signal at 32 light years, the civilization that had been transformed within his own lifetime. And he thought about humanity, about his species' insatiable curiosity, about the way humans could never leave a mystery unsolved, or a question unasked. They would find it eventually, or it would find them. The James Webb would keep watching, researchers would keep studying. Someone would go too far, look too deep, touch something they shouldn't touch. It was inevitable. It was human nature. The architects had sent their plea 640 million years ago. Others had sent similar messages across vast gulfs of space and time, all of them hoping that someone, somewhere, would be wise enough to turn back from the abyss. But wisdom, Thomas had learned, was not humanity's strongest trait. Curiosity was. The need to know. The compulsion to understand. He looked at the images one last time, then filed them away in his desk drawer. Tomorrow he would try to be normal again. He would have coffee with Jennifer, attend Emma's recital, pretend that the universe was safe and knowable, and that the space between stars held nothing but more stars. But tonight, in the quiet hours before dawn, he allowed himself to acknowledge the truth. Humanity would keep reaching into the darkness, confident that their knowledge and technology would keep them safe. They would keep reaching until something reached back. And when it did, when the transformation began, when the lights started moving in synchronized patterns across Earth's cities, maybe someone would send out a message of their own. Another bottle cast into the cosmic ocean, hoping some other civilization might prove wiser than all those who came before. But Thomas suspected, with a certainty that made his chest ache, that the answer would be the same. That curiosity was universal, that every intelligent species eventually looked too deep, that the cycle would continue, repeating across cosmic time until there was nothing left but empty structures and synchronized lights and messages that no one would ever heed. The stars shone on, beautiful and indifferent, keeping their secrets locked in light that had travelled for eons to reach eyes that might not survive long enough to understand them. And somewhere in the vast expanse, something ancient and patient continued its work, following a path it had traced countless times before, leaving nothing but silence and transformation in its wake. Thomas closed his eyes and tried to sleep, knowing the dreams would come again. The falling through empty spaces, the sensation of being watched by something that existed in dimensions he couldn't perceive, the whispers in languages that predated human speech. But even knowing that, even understanding the danger, he couldn't bring himself to stop thinking about it, couldn't stop trying to understand. because he was human, and humans were cursed with curiosity, just like the architects had been, just like every civilization that had ever reached for the stars. And just like them, Thomas suspected, humanity would learn its lesson when it was already too late. The universe was older than humanity could fathom. Some of its secrets, Thomas now knew, were never meant to be discovered, but they would be discovered anyway, because that's what intelligent life did. It asked questions, it sought answers, it reached for understanding, even when understanding meant destruction. Emma's piano recital was on Saturday. She was playing Chopin, a nocturne in E-flat major. Thomas had promised to be there, to sit in the front row and watch his daughter's fingers dance across the keys, creating something beautiful in a universe that was so much darker and stranger than she could possibly imagine. He would keep that promise. He would smile and applaud and tell her how proud he was. He would take her out for ice cream afterward and listen to her talk about her friends and her homework and all the normal concerns of a 12-year-old girl, living in a world that felt safe and comprehensible. And he wouldn't tell her that somewhere out there something was getting closer, that the space between stars wasn't empty, that her father had seen things in decoded transmissions that suggested the universe was far less hospitable than anyone wanted to believe. She deserved her innocence. She deserved to grow up believing that humanity's future was bright, that the stars were theirs for the taking, that knowledge was always a gift and never a curse, even if none of that was true, even if the architects and 1,000 other civilizations had learned otherwise, even if Earth was simply next in line, waiting its turn to be noticed by something that had been consuming civilizations since before the first stars ignited. Thomas stood at his window watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Somewhere up there, 40 light years away, a civilization had sent its final message just 20 years ago. 32 light years away, structures still orbited dead worlds. Light still moved in synchronized patterns across empty cities. And here on Earth, in a small office in New Mexico, a man who knew too much tried to find comfort in the ordinary, in coffee that had gone cold, in classical music playing softly, in the knowledge that tomorrow his daughter would play Chopin, and he would be there to hear it. The universe kept its secrets well, but sometimes, if you looked long enough and deep enough, those secrets looked back. And once they did, Thomas had learned, there was no going back to the comfortable ignorance of before. The interview would air next month. A few conspiracy theorists would discuss it. Most would dismiss it as fiction, as fear-mongering, as the ravings of someone who'd spent too long staring at the stars. And the James Webb Space Telescope would continue its observations, feeding endless streams of data to researchers who believed that they were ready for whatever truth the universe held. Thomas hoped they were right. He feared they were wrong. And in the deepest part of his mind, the part that woke him at 3 a.m, with his heart racing and his skin cold, he suspected it no longer mattered which they were. The universe was vast and old and full of things that existed before humanity's ancestors had crawled out of the ocean. Some of those things, he now knew, were still out there, still patient, still hungry for civilizations that reached too far and touched knowledge they weren't meant to possess. The architects had learned that lesson 640 million years ago. Countless others had learned it since. Now it was the humanity's turn to decide. Heed the messages carved in ancient light, or continue reaching into the darkness, confident that this time would be different. Thomas already knew which choice his species would make. He only hoped he was wrong about what would happen next. But hope, he discovered, was a poor defense against the cold mathematics of cosmic horror. The stars shone on, indifferent to his fears, indifferent to his knowledge, indifferent to the fate of every civilization that had ever looked up at them, and wondered what secrets they held. Thomas turned away from the window and went to bed, though he knew sleep wouldn't come easily. It never did anymore. In the morning, he woke to find Jennifer already up making breakfast. The smell of coffee and toast filled the kitchen, achingly normal, achingly precious. She kissed him and asked if he'd slept well, and he lied and said yes. Emma came downstairs in her pajamas, her hair a mess, complaining about an English assignment due Monday. She was 12 years old and brilliant and full of dreams about becoming a marine biologist. She wanted to study the deep ocean, she'd told him once, because there were so many mysteries down there waiting to be discovered. Thomas had smiled and encouraged her, even as something inside him whispered that maybe some mysteries were better left unsolved. "Dad, are you okay?" Emma asked, looking at him with concern. "You look tired." "I'm fine, sweetheart, just didn't sleep great. Are you still coming to my recital on Saturday?" "Wouldn't miss it for the world." She grinned, satisfied, and went back to her cereal. Thomas watched her eat, watched Jennifer move around the kitchen, and tried to memorize this moment, this perfect, ordinary morning. Because somewhere in the back of his mind, he couldn't shake the feeling that ordinary mornings were numbered, that humanity was living on borrowed time, dancing on the edge of a knife without realizing how thin the blade was. The week passed in a blur of normalcy. Thomas took walks, read books, tried to reconnect with the rhythms of regular life, but every night when the house was quiet and the stars came out, he found himself at his window staring up at the sky, wondering which points of light were already dead, already transformed, already serving purposes no human mind could comprehend. On Thursday, another message arrived from his contact at the observatory. Thomas almost didn't open it, almost deleted it without reading, but curiosity, that damned human curiosity, wouldn't let him. The James Webb had found something else. Another star system, this one only 18 light years away. No transmission, no message, just structures and lights, moving in patterns. 18 light years. The distance was shrinking. The timeline was accelerating. Whatever was out there, it was getting closer with each new discovery. Or maybe it had always been this close, and humanity was only now developing the technology to see it. Thomas deleted the message and made a decision. No more. He wouldn't open any more messages from the observatory. He wouldn't look for any more updates. He would live the rest of his life in willful ignorance, cherishing every moment with his family, every ordinary day that passed without humanity stumbling into the abyss. Because if the architects and all the others had taught him anything, it was that some knowledge destroyed the knower. And Thomas wanted to remain himself, remain human, for as long as possible. Saturday arrived. Emma's recital was at 2 in the afternoon at the community centre downtown. Thomas and Jennifer arrived early, taking seats in the front row. The room filled with other parents, other families, everyone smiling and chatting and excited to hear their children play. Emma came out on stage looking nervous but determined in her black dress. She sat at the piano, adjusted the bench, and placed her hands on the keys. Then she began to play, the Nocturne in E-flat major. Chopin had written it almost 200 years ago, a piece of such haunting beauty that it had survived across centuries, passed from generation to generation, treasured by anyone who heard it. Thomas listened to his daughter play, watched her fingers move across the keys with growing confidence, and felt tears prick at his eyes. This was what mattered. This moment. This beauty. This connection between a long-dead composer and a living child, mediated through mathematics and physics and the mechanics of hammers striking strings. Humanity had created this, not alien civilizations with 800 million years of advancement. Humans. Flawed, curious, brilliant, doomed humans who looked at the universe and decided to make music anyway. Emma finished. The audience applauded. She stood and bowed, grinning with relief and pride. Thomas applauded harder than anyone, his heart full of love and terror in equal measure. After the recital, they took her for ice cream as promised. Emma ordered her usual chocolate chip cookie dough and talked excitedly about the performance, about which parts she thought went well and which parts she'd messed up, though Thomas hadn't noticed any mistakes. "Mr. Henderson says I should consider applying to music schools when I'm older," she said through a mouthful of ice cream. "But I don't know. I still really want to study the ocean." "You can do both," Jennifer said. "You don't have to choose right now." "Yeah, but eventually I will, right? Eventually you have to pick what you want to be." Thomas looked at his daughter, so young, so full of possibilities, so convinced that the future stretched out before her like an open road. "You don't have to decide anything today," he said quietly. "Just enjoy being 12. The future will take care of itself." But even as he said it, he wondered what kind of future she would have. Would she grow up to study the ocean like she dreamed? Would she go to music school? Would she fall in love, have children of her own, grow old in a world that remained recognizably human? Or would something change? Would the lights begin moving in synchronized patterns across Earth's cities? Would humanity transform into something that served purposes they couldn't understand, joining the architects and all the others in that long silence? Thomas didn't know, couldn't know. All he could do was cherish this moment, this day, this simple pleasure of ice cream with his family on a Saturday afternoon. That night, after Emma had gone to bed and Jennifer was reading in the living room, Thomas returned to his office one last time. He pulled out the printed images, looked at them in the dim light, then carefully fed them into his shredder. The machine whirred, cutting the paper into thin strips, destroying the last physical evidence he possessed. It was time to let go, time to stop carrying this burden, time to be a husband and father instead of someone haunted by ancient transmissions and cosmic horror. He emptied the shredder into a trash bag, took it outside and threw it away. Then he went back inside, locked his office door, and joined Jennifer on the couch. She looked up from her book, surprised to see him. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Yeah," he said, and realized he meant it. Or at least, he was choosing to mean it. Choosing to focus on what he could control, what he could protect, what he could love. "Everything's okay." She smiled and leaned against him, returning to her book. Thomas closed his eyes and listened to the sound of her breathing, the tick of the clock on the wall, the distant hum of the refrigerator. Ordinary sounds, human sounds, sounds that meant life was continuing, at least for now. The stars outside continued their slow dance across the sky. The universe continued its ancient work, indifferent to human hopes and fears. And somewhere, maybe 50 light years away, maybe 32, maybe 18, something moved through the darkness with terrible patience. But here, in this house, in this moment, Thomas chose to focus on the warmth of his wife beside him, the knowledge that his daughter was safe in her bed upstairs, the simple fact that they were all still here, still themselves, still human. Tomorrow he would wake up and make breakfast. He would help Emma with her homework. He would kiss his wife goodbye before she left for work. He would live his life as if the universe was safe and comprehensible and kind. And maybe, if he was very lucky, he would never learn otherwise. Maybe humanity would prove wiser than the architects. Maybe they would heed the messages, recognize the danger, step back from the abyss. Or maybe not. Maybe, years from now, or decades or centuries, Earth would join that long list of silent worlds, its lights moving in synchronized patterns, its people transformed into something unrecognizable, serving purposes beyond human understanding. But that was a problem for the future, a problem for people who came after, who made different choices, who looked too deep, despite all the evidence that they shouldn't. Tonight, Thomas was just a man sitting with his wife, grateful for the ordinary miracle of another day, another moment, another breath. The interview would air next month. Rebecca Cross would release it into the world, and maybe it would make a difference. Maybe someone with more power than Thomas would see it and take action. Maybe humanity would change course, or maybe it would be dismissed, forgotten, lost in the noise of a million other conspiracy theories and fringe beliefs. Either way, Thomas had done what he could. He'd tried to sound the alarm. He'd tried to pass on what the architects had taught him, at great cost, across 640 million years. Now it was up to everyone else. He opened his eyes and looked at Jennifer, still reading her book, completely unaware of the cosmic horror her husband had spent the last 6 months grappling with. She was beautiful in the lamplight, her reading glasses perched on her nose, her hair falling across her face. "I love you," he said suddenly. She looked up, surprised but pleased. "I love you too. What brought that on?" "Just wanted you to know." She smiled, set down her book, and kissed him. "You've been different lately, quieter. Are you sure everything's okay?" "I'm sure," he lied and pulled her closer. "I'm just glad to be home." And that, at least, was true. Whatever was coming, whatever humanity's fate would be, Thomas was grateful for this. For her. For Emma. For these precious, ordinary moments that made life worth living, even in a universe that held such terrible secrets. The stars shone on outside, ancient and cold and full of mysteries humanity might never understand. The space between them held things older than light, patient as stone, waiting for the next curious civilization to reach too far. But inside this house, in this moment, there was warmth and love and the simple human conviction that tomorrow would come, and it would be okay. Thomas held on to that conviction with everything he had, knowing it might be an illusion, but needing it anyway. Because in the end, what else was there? What else could anyone do but love the people around them, cherish the time they had, and hope that the darkness, when it came, would find humanity ready? Or if not ready, at least defiant, at least still human, at least still capable of creating beauty, like Chopin nocturnes and sharing ice cream on Saturday afternoons, and holding the people you love close in the face of an incomprehensible universe. That was worth something. That had to be worth something, even if the architects and all the others had learned it wasn't enough. Thomas chose to believe, against all evidence, that maybe for humanity it would be different. That maybe this time the story would have a different ending. That maybe the warnings carved in ancient light would finally be heeded. But if not, if the worst came to pass, and Earth joined that long silence, at least he had loved well. At least he had been present for his daughter's recital. At least he had held his wife close and told her he loved her, and meant it with every fibre of his being. In a universe full of cosmic horror and ancient terrors, that was its own small rebellion, and it would have to be enough.